Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pints and Politics. You got me, Drew, and Representative Mike Weiner. How you doing today, Mike?
I'm good.
Good.
I'm glad to be back in district, and it's a long week down at the Capitol, but good to be home.
Yeah, a long week. I've heard something. I heard you were meeting with some climate guys today. Were they lobbyists, activists, or politicians?
Well, because I'm on the energy committee, the climate stuff comes up quite a bit, and met with a group and it's really kind of interesting because for the most part, the climate activists have been against lifting the nuclear moratorium. But there are more and more groups who are saying we need an all of the above approach. And these guys were talking about clean energy, and they said they're actually in favor of lifting the nuclear moratorium. So we sat down and talked. We had some good discussions. There were some things about carbon that I think are a little bit problematic from what they had to say. But he goes, I understand some of your thoughts on climate. He goes, I've watched your podcast. So, I mean, that was kind of cool that, he understood at least where I'm coming from. But we had good conversations. And I think that's a good start. It's everybody comes from a different viewpoint, and sometimes just sitting down having that talk, you never know where it's gonna end up. Um, but we had a nice talk at the Capitol, so that was good.
So when it comes to the nuclear moratorium and energy, how is it looking? Pretty good, or are we gonna lift it? And what would lifting the moratorium mean per se?
Well, the biggest part of the problem that we have right now is look at what's happened on a global scale, right? And it seems like on most things, we are 5 years, 6, 7 years behind Europe. So Europe went to a lot of carbon-free standards and so forth a number of years ago. France is one of the few countries I think that has primarily, I think they're almost 100% nuclear. But a bunch of the other countries were trying to go towards more carbon-friendly electric. And the other thing they did to reduce their carbon emissions was burning more natural gas because that's cleaner. Well, what happened was when Ukraine, of course, the conflict in Ukraine started, all of a sudden natural gas became pretty expensive and pretty hard to get. So they had mothballed. Germany and a couple other countries had mothballed their coal plants and a few other things, and they had to fire them back up because of the shortage and the cost of natural gas. And then they started realizing that, hey, this pigeonholing or just saying that one type of energy is the best solution came to the realization that that's not a good answer. It kind of takes an all of the above approach.
Yeah, isn't there an old cliche about putting all of your eggs in one basket?
That's very true. And there's things that I've learned. So Germany has actually had I think it's a 4 or 5 month um, decrease in wind. I'll say it that way. So if you're relying on wind energy and they got X percentage of their renewable from wind, and now all of a sudden you have 4 months of lower than average wind, becomes kind of a problem, doesn't it?
It does.
And we've actually seen that in the state of Minnesota. It came up in committee where there was a 48-hour period, I think last summer, where the wind just didn't turn the wind turbine. So all of a sudden, that supply that they kind of looked at and thought, we can kind of count on it, all of a sudden wasn't there. So for an extended period of time, you don't have that energy source coming in. And then one of the things that I brought up was, well, what's the decrease in solar when we had like the forest fires up in Canada?
Oh yeah, because we've been getting that every year too.
Well, in that,
And
those
we've got
forest fires are a natural occurrence. They've been
yeah, is
going
it forest
on.
fires or brush fires? 'Cause I think it's brush fires.
Well, I would say it's forest fires.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because this is natural. If you look at history, once again, um, we even have, I think there's 5 different types of pine trees, coniferous trees, that need heat. They need flames to open up in order to replant. So that's built in nature, right?
Yeah.
That's naturally occurring that you have to have those in certain places. So to say that, fires have been gotten worse over the last how many years or whatever, I don't know if that's quite accurate. If nature itself requires those fires for some species to grow,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, I know if you go to the Rockies and west of, you get a lot of that forest fires. And I believe
Mhm.
Yellowstone actually talks about how the trees need to light on fire so that the pine cones can open up.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was referring
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, because I remember back when I was in high school, my family went on a trip to Yellowstone and they talked about that. They also talked about how it was like a super volcano, and that's why all the park rangers had their backed into their spots so they could get out faster if it started to erupt.
Right.
I mean, I think that was a joke, but you never know.
But if you look at most of the forest, even up in Canada and stuff, um, that's a way of rejuvenating the land, right?
Yeah.
Trees are basically the same thing, or it's kind of the same as a crop if you really want to think about it. A crop starts off, it grows, it matures, and then once it gets to a certain point, it starts to die, right? Forests and trees are the same way. Once they get a life expectancy or hit a certain life expectancy, they start to go backwards. And then you have a lot of deadfall, fires start, burns off that stuff, then the brush starts growing back up, and it's a process. This has been going on since the beginning of time.
Yeah.
And, to say they're worse now than ever before, and I did a little bit of digging in history, and there's the Great Hinckley Fire in 1870s, I think, 1890s, 1870s, something like that,
Okay.
um, where they said it was an extremely dry year that year and had huge millions of acres, I think, that burned. And if you go back and look at just in our recorded history, it's happened so many times that we've had these great fires. We as humans think that we have control over so much. This has been going on for a long time. Do we affect climate? Yes, to a certain extent. Nature has a way of changing the situation that's greater than our control. But going back to the solar panels, think of what it was like that summer when it was almost cloudy for an extended period of time.
How many summers ago was this? Because I think I remember it.
I
Was
think
it
two
like,
years ago we had this where the air quality alerts were bad. But then going back, um, well, it must
yeah.
have been 5, 6 years ago already now. There was some of that same stuff because my brother was still around then, and he's passed away 3 years now, 4 years. So it,
Yeah, I
it happens on a
remember.
regular basis.
Yeah, it was a couple of years ago. I remember this, that it was smoky for about a month.
Hmm.
Yeah, and that's got to affect how the solar panels pick up UV lights. Is it UV that
Exactly.
they run on, or is it I guess I don't know how solar energy works.
I'm not sure if that's actually UV, but
Yeah,
point being, when it comes to those sources, the wind doesn't always blow, the
yeah.
sun doesn't always shine. And one of the testifiers had said that we had, I think it was in January, we had record amount of solar energy in the state of Minnesota.
January.
Well, we had really clean air, and because I think it was January, and when there's no, the air has got less particulate and so forth during the winter, the air is cleaner. And because we have more solar panels, that also meant that we ended up with more solar energy than ever before. Um, but that doesn't always mean that that's at the peak times and when we need it the most either.
Yeah,
So I think
exactly.
when we have more cold air, that affects it as well. Less
Okay.
humidity, less moisture in the air.
Yeah, that makes sense. Again, there's so many different factors, and I guarantee, like, not everybody considers these factors when they're advocating for wind or solar.
Correct. And
Yeah.
that's why the grid itself and the demand fluctuates as well. So when you have the energy sources fluctuating, you have the demand fluctuating, you have to have something that can stabilize that. And that's where you need consistent energy. And whether that's fossil fuels, whether it's coal, whether it's natural gas, whether it's nuclear, whatever, even hydro is more consistent. But nuclear is basically like a flat line. You can keep that energy consistent all the time. And then when they need more demand, it's easier to kick on like a natural gas
Right.
energy production or something like that. So
Yeah,
that's why
that's
it's an all of the above approach.
yeah, I like it. It's smart to have a backup plan. It always is. And speaking of backup plans, I think we'll hop into our next little story here is because it's coming up pretty quick. We have a special election coming up on March 11th in District 40B, which was won by Curtis Johnson. I'm saying his name, right? Curtis Johnson.
Yes.
Yeah, and he didn't live in the district, so he cheated to get that spot, and so now we're doing a redo of the election, and that's coming up. Just wanted to shout that out real quick. I don't know if you're in 40B, which is Roseville and Shoreview, kind of make sure you keep an eye on that. You got anything on it, Mike?
There's been a lot of attention paid to it.
Mhm.
I'm sure there's being money thrown at this.
Oh yeah,
We've
there's
been
definitely
so
money
bu-
thrown at it.
yeah, we've been so busy in the house that I haven't taken much time. But the balance of power kind of hinges on that race.
Yeah, so big high stakes, kind of.
It is. It
The
is.
Senate's tied, and right now Republicans have a one-seat majority. Well, if the Democrats win in 40B, it's a tie. If they lose, it's a two-seat majority, or is it just one?
Yeah, if we win that race, it would be 68-66.
Okay.
If they win it, we're tied 67-67.
Okay.
But that is a Democrat leaning district. I think that's a 60%
Yeah.
district.
Yep.
So it'll
So
be
it's all right.
challenging.
Yeah, it's really all about getting out the vote in this one because it's a special election. We're probably going to see super low numbers, probably ranging in the low thousands, I would assume. Because the
Yeah,
Minneapolis Senate runoff was about 1,000 people who actually went and voted.
yeah, for those special elections, you're definitely right. It just doesn't get as much attention. Um, so it's all about voter turnout. Which candidate is going to get their people to the polls is going to win.
Yeah. It's funny, we're at the end of February here talking today, and we're still talking about winning elections. Like it's
Yeah.
November. Hilarious.
Well,
That's how,
the other thing I just thought about, and this is something that came up recently, and I'm going to get sidetracked here pretty easily, but there's discussion as to move the primaries up into March.
okay.
So think about that. Right now, we're saying a special election in February or in March actually has low voter turnout.
Yeah.
Well, primaries in March is going to do the exact same thing. And there's people who have been pushing for that. And it's basically to challenge or get rid of the endorsing conventions.
Oh,
So it minimize the effect of the endorsing conventions and go straight to primary. Well, in the state of Minnesota, we have open primaries. Okay.
yeah.
Meaning that if I go in and grab a ballot and it has the Democrats on one side, Republicans on the other, as long as I vote on the same side, I can't cross vote.
Mhm.
Okay. But I know I had Democrats vote for me in the primary. So do we want Democrats choosing our candidates? I don't
Yeah,
think
it
that's a
allows
very
for
good
dirty
idea.
tactics.
That's right. It opens it up for dirty tactics, but I do believe in the endorsing system.
Yeah.
Is it
No,
100?
it's nice because it allows like if you join a political party, like there's a point to it. If you don't join a political party, like in an open primary state, there's really no point in joining a party. It's
Yeah,
if you sabotage things like that. And we've pushed joining BPOUs or getting involved because it's the best way to have a voice. By removing the endorsing convention, it actually strips away your voice in
it
that
sure
regard.
does.
Yeah,
And what I see or what I hear is there's people that say we need to get rid of the endorsing conventions because they tend to lean more towards the extremes. Well,
right,
I don't know that that's an accurate accusation, but I think when it comes right down to it, the BPOUs, your people who are involved, are the most educated locally when it comes to politics, and they know those candidates better. Um, like I was saying before, is that system perfect? No, none of them are. But to get rid of that caucus system, that endorsing system, it's just a bad way to go. The other thing it does is it turns everything into money. On primaries, what happens is the person with the most money generally wins. So then you're excluding a good candidate who maybe just isn't good at fundraising. And we see so much money that corrupts politics already. We don't need to make it worse. And
right,
going to a primary system where it all comes down to money. I think it's a terrible idea. Um, but we see some people on the left are really are pushing for this because it would probably have a worse effect on the Republicans. We can't fundraise to the same extent that the Democrats do, right? So if
right.
this just came down to money, that would put us at a serious disadvantage as well.
Well, it puts that'll put the whole state into a. I'm going to use the word kleptocracy because
Hmm,
big word, but that's what it'll turn into. So that it'll have the rich people stealing pretty much from everyone else. They'll steal their votes, their voice. They'll steal their vote and government, and they'll eventually just end up stealing their rights. And yeah, it's a bad idea. It just the endorsing convention, it really does allow for the people to speak. What does it say in the House chamber? What Vox Popularum, Vox Dei,
that's right.
right? Yeah, so like if you believe in like a republic or democracy or whatever kind of government you think that we live in, like the people have a voice and need to be able to vote.
Right.
So yeah, we need to keep the endorsing conventions. Don't move the primary. That's an awful idea. And if that's something they're trying to do at the state level, yeah, we got to fight that.
Yeah, that's something that we definitely need to educate people, educate delegates. That's part of our
Oh,
job as
absolutely.
as are elected. That's part of our job is to explain the why. And I think it's really important that we keep the caucus system, keep the endorsing conventions, the voice of the people, the grassroots. We need that. It's
Right.
absolutely essential. So yeah,
But, but
I
quick
will
reminder, March 11th, there's a vote going on.
not.
It's a special election, emphasis on special. I wanted to touch on that, and then I think we have one last thing, right? Or am I wrong? Do we have one or two?
Um, we were going to talk about paid family medical leave, and then we also talked a little bit before the show about um, the Walls comments.
Yeah, let's do walls, and then we'll end on the paid family medical leave.
Sure.
Because
So if
yeah,
you've watched the news, you tell me what your thoughts
yeah.
are.
Okay, so I remember hearing about Walls. He threw out some comment about everyone who didn't vote for him being like a Nazi or something. I brushed it off. It's so old hearing that the people you disagree with are racists or whatever. It's been how many years has that been a talking point, right? So you brush it off. And then I was talking to some people the other day at a Young Republicans event. Funny enough, it was in a bar and we were having a pint talking politics. Almost like, that kind of stuff brings people together. But they were asking me about it because I guess he doubled down. And so earlier today, even I was looking for it on X, going through Walls's post, and I couldn't find it. And then I was like, well, maybe I'll check Alpha News. And what do you know? Alpha News supplies. So the story goes that Governor Walls said the country is being stolen by fascists and Nazis, according to recording obtained by Alpha News. And Mike, I don't know if you've read the story yet, but take a wild guess on who actually got the recording. It's
Um,
Senator Nate Wiesenberg, of all people, the
go
Duck
figure.
Dynasty himself. So yeah, it's really interesting as people were asking what's wrong with the Democrat Party, and Walls just immediately decided to blame fascists and not the boogeyman, as it were, as to why he's not getting his way or why the Democrats are failing. And to answer, and I suppose I'll ask you the question first, Mike. What do you think is wrong with the Democrat Party?
I think in a lot of ways, what they tried to do and what the mentality was is that they had to have a big tent, right?
Mhm.
Which pulled all of these different factions in different groups together. Now, in some ways, that's okay if you can keep the different groups pointed in the right direction. They could probably do it. But what's happened with the Democrat Party is it has gone more and more and more extreme, and it has gotten out of touch with the average American. Um, so if you look at it right now, when you have government spending out of control, when you have all these social programs which are pushing an agenda, and the American people have finally gotten to the point, I feel, where they're saying, you know what, the Democrats don't represent us anymore. That's why
Right.
you see, especially the numbers that voted for Trump of minority groups, it was kind of staggering. You know,
Yeah.
Latinos for Trump, blacks for Trump. Those numbers increased a lot because the Democrat Party has gone so far left that they don't represent the people anymore. And
Yeah, and
James Carville has talked about, you know, it's the economy. That's part of it. But the social aspects, they have just gone too far.
absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you on that. What and so from the way I see it is because they've picked this most oppressed group that they can go as far left as they can go, and they've also gone with the tactic of we're going to signal our virtues, so they're going to talk big and act like they care about everyone. But the second somebody disagrees with them, they're immediately far right, fascist, Nazi, bigot, racist, you name it. And it can be the slightest disagreement. If they're not marching in lockstep, it's the end of the world. And we saw that with Tim Walz in this story. It's so I guess my answer is that they don't work on actually preparing arguments. It's about like if you can signal that you're virtuous and then beat down anybody else as unvirtuous, therefore you deserve the vote. Whereas on the Republican side, we focus on policy. Does that make
Well, I
sense?
think there's a lot of truth to that. And I just thought about something else. And, you know, and always referred to Governor Walz as Comrade Walz. His
Right.
ties with communist China are pretty heavy. But, and I wish I had thought about this before, but there is a tactic that was in one of the communists' playbook that
Hmm.
says basically if anybody disagrees with you, you attack them with that, with aligning them with those groups, which was exactly the fascists, the Nazis, people that have uh, you know, negative connotations. So anybody that attacks you, you label them as those um, groups that people don't like.
Yeah, I get
It,
that. And
it's
it screams insecurity about your ideas and your arguments. At
Yeah, I
least
think this is really the playbook. So much of what's gone on here is basically comes back to the Communist Manifesto. You see so many ties with individuals in military, or I mean, sorry, Minnesota politics, Democrat Minnesota politics, with ties to Marxism and communism and socialism. We've talked about that many times too, how it's not the DFL, it's the DSA, Democrat Socialists of America. And socialism is one step away from communism. So they are following the playbook,
yep.
and it's kind of interesting. But I think the Democrats have gone so far. Now what they're going to do though is they're going to backpedal.
I hope so.
Try to.
And I got to cut you off here, Mike. We are starting to run low on time.
Okay,
And
sorry
I just
about
want to
that.
get one more word in on this, and then we'll move to paid family medical leave. Whereas, okay, so Walls calls everyone who disagrees with him a fascist and a Nazi. It's really sad because in 2022 he ran on a ticket of one Minnesota. And he
That's
still
right.
talked about one Minnesota, and you can't have one Minnesota when you're using this communist tactic of berating anybody who doesn't agree with you 100%. And one
Remember,
Minnesota,
we're just a bunch of rocks and cows out here.
that's fair. We don't count as people. Well, anyway, Mike, so real quick, before we end today, fill us in on paid family medical leave. It was passed last session, but it hasn't gone into effect yet.
Right. And this has it's such a negative impact on not just our businesses, especially small businesses, but
Mhm.
it has a negative impact on our schools, our counties, even down to our townships. Because with that, the paid family medical leave, although it sounds good, you can take up to 20 weeks, capped at 20 weeks per year of paid time off.
Okay, so half the
Now,
year, roughly.
yeah, there's 52 weeks in a year minus vacations and stuff. You figure, I think it was what 48 typical working weeks or something like that, I think it is. I had a superintendent from a school district call me today, and he said this is one of their biggest concerns. They're going to have to hire more staff to cover the paid family medical leave. And he said, we already take care of the employees that we have, you know? So this is basically a redundancy. But when we see so much waste, fraud, and abuse in government and in some of these nonprofits, NGOs, things like that, this system, I guarantee you, will be frauded. There will be people who will take advantage of it. And then there's such a wide expanse of possible reasons for taking that time off. You know it's going to be frauded. The
Yeah,
other
it's
thing,
definitely going to be abused.
yeah, the taxes have already increased. I think this is the third time now on the bill, and it hasn't even been implemented yet. So it is a horrible thing. Our private sector says we need to stop this. The public sector says we need to stop this. The Democrats have done a very good job of making it sound really good, but it will cost our taxpayers way more than they can imagine at this time. And very few of them will probably ever use it.
Right. I think, yeah, I'm kind of worried that people will just make something up and use the paid family medical leave and just to take huge vacations, and we're going to see businesses just shutter and shut down, and we might see economic collapse because of this. That's what I'm worried about.
There are a lot of people who are concerned if we have to push it back, if nothing else, with
Mhm.
the implementation. It's going to be hard to shut it down entirely just because of the votes and stuff in the House and Senate and governorship this year. But we have to
Right.
push it back. We absolutely have to. So our businesses and everybody else keeps saying the same thing. It's going to be a killer in the state of Minnesota, a job
Yeah.
killer, economic killer.
So stuff to look at, stuff to pay attention to, and to everyone listening, make your voices heard. Read into this stuff. It's really worth looking into. And I know we could keep going, but we actually do have to cut it today. It's been a good talk, Mike. Um, Everyone, thank you for watching. This is Pints and Politics. I'm Drew. We're with Mike. Once again, thank you guys so much. God bless.
So take care.
Yep.